فاصبر صبرا جميلا.
So let's look at this from the point of view of the one who is taking themselves to account. And they look at themselves, what is the first mistake that they make? Mistake number one is that they look at their sins that they do rather than the good deeds that they don't do. This is mistake number one. They look at the sins that they do rather than the good deeds that they don't do. Because sin is of two types, ya ikhwani. Fi'lun wa tark. Doing something and abandoning something. And what the shaitan does is the shaitan focuses us on the things that we do and lets us ignore the things that we abandon. So for example, let us just imagine for a second that a person thinks, in the last hour, I didn't do anything, for example, that I can think of that was wrong. But what about the things that you didn't do? What about the things you didn't do? What about when you walked past that person who was doing something wrong and you didn't tell them to stop doing it? What about when your parents were in need and you didn't answer their need? What about the time when your neighbor was expecting for you to knock on the door and ask them how they are and fulfill their rights and you didn't fulfill those rights? Sin is not just about what you do, it's also about what you leave. Leaving a wajib is just as much of a sin as doing a haram. So a person may have left any number of the wajibat, any number of the obligatory deeds, but the shaitan has only got you focused on what you actually did. So bear in mind that sin is of two types. Fi'lun wa tark. Fi'lul haram wa tark al-wajib. Doing the haram and abandoning the wajib, and both of them are sins. And the wajib upon you, the more knowledge you have, the greater that burden is. The more knowledge that you have, the greater that burden is. I don't know how many of you attended the khutbah today, if you had the same khutbah that we had, but the khutbah regarding the safina, regarding the ship, and the example that the Prophet ﷺ gave. There are people on top of the ship and people below the ship. So the people below the ship, they are the ones in a bad situation, and the people on top, they are the ones who are in a good situation. So the people on the bottom, they say, we need some water. We will just cut one small hole in the ship and then we will take the water that we need and it will not harm the people who are above. The Prophet ﷺ said, so if the people who are above leave them to do it, then they will all be destroyed. And if they forbid them from doing it, then they will all be saved. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. You are the best ummah. When you tell the people to do good and you stop the people from doing evil. And I'm not talking about on a societal level. I'm talking about in your own home. You say, I didn't backbite anyone, but you walked in to find your wife backbiting somebody and you didn't say anything. Or you walked in to find your children listening to music and you didn't switch it off. Or you didn't tell them not to do it. Sins are not just what you do, but also what you don't do. So next time you take yourself to account, don't just take yourself to account in what you did, but take yourself to account also in what you didn't do, including fulfilling rights that people have over you. How many times have you promised somebody something and you didn't fulfill on that promise? How many times have you been in a position where somebody has a right over you, your mom, your father, your children, your wife, your business partner, your neighbor, and you didn't fulfill that right? For every minute that you don't fulfill that right, you are earning sin in the sight of Allah. And yet a person says, I don't think that I did any sins. This is point number one. Don't just think about what you did as an action, but also think about what you didn't do. Every time you left a wajib, or every time you had some knowledge and you didn't act upon it. Every time you knew something was the right thing to do, but you didn't do that right thing. That is also a sin.